If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
Is this 2003 again? That question may sound dramatic, but it is being asked quietly in European capitals, in intelligence circles, and increasingly in financial markets. A war against Iran feels as though it is moving from speculation towards expectation, towards reality. This weekend may be the make or break for the decision. Marco Rubio arrives to Israel on the 2nd of March. The media is preparing audiences for it, whether they're on the left wing or the right wing. Oil markets are pricing it in. Crude oil prices jumped over $2 on Friday. Defense stocks have surged sharply higher. RTX, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, all climbing as if anticipating expanded contracts and a sustained regional escalation. And overall, the stock markets were jittery again. When capital begins positioning ahead of policy, it tells you that investors believe that risk is no longer hypothetical. And overall, the administration is saying and doing everything that seems to suggest that everyone's expectations are correct. The president's latest comments were, he's not happy. At the same time, the military posture is unmistakable. This is the largest deployment of US aircraft to the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq War. 16 warships now are operating in the region. Carrier strike groups, air assets, missile defense systems, all the architecture of deterrence or offense is being assembled at scale. And when the deterrence architecture reaches this magnitude, it often begins to blur into preparation of war. The administration's public messaging has only added to the tension. Officials have floated a series of rationales for confrontation, supporting the suppressed Iranian demonstrators, whose numbers seem to increase every time, from 3,000 killed to 32,000 by the latest numbers that were given out by Trump during the State of Union address. They're going to want to dismantle Tehran's nuclear infrastructure, eliminate ballistic missile capability, degrade proxy networks across the region. President Trump has even spoken openly of regime change, calling it the best thing that could happen. So the scope of objectives appears to have expanded by this weekend. During the State of Union, the president warned that Iran was developing missiles that would soon reach the United States. The narrative that Iran is close to a nuclear weapon or rapidly developing missiles that are capable of reaching thousands of miles across to the United States lack any credible evidence. But that hasn't stopped the administration from saying it. Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, suggested that Iran is probably only a week away from industrial-grade bomb-making material at 60% enrichment. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, assured Americans that there was no plan for a long military engagement, but he also said there is evidence that Tehran has attempted to rebuild a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us, he said, told Fox News. Yet Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared to contradict both, stating that Iran is not currently enriching, but is trying to reach the point where it ultimately can. Now, this internal inconsistency matters, because when threat narratives diverge, credibility becomes central. And this current administration already has massive issues when it comes to credibility across the world. Marco Rubio told reporters, beyond just the nuclear program, they possess these conventional weapons that are solely designed to attack America and attack Americans if they so choose to do so. They already possess weapons that can reach much of Europe already now as we speak. That comment had the former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt warning that the rhetoric increasingly resembles 2003. Now that reference isn't casual. The comparison to 2003 is not about claiming identical circumstances. It is about recognizing a familiar pattern. The language of a window of action that needs to happen soon because it's narrowing. The projection of a future threat and the logic for a preventative war. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq under President George W. Bush on the assertion that the then President Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. Those claims were later found to be deeply overstated, and in many cases they were built on unreliable sources. No active WMD stockpiles were ever discovered. Now, for European policymakers, 2003 is a shorthand for a preventive war driven by the worst-case intelligence assumptions. Now, the parallel becomes sharper when we place that alongside recent history. After the 12-day war between Iran and Israel last year, President Trump declared that Iran's nuclear facilities had been obliterated and that any ability to rapidly build a weapon had been destroyed. Yet less than 1 year later now, administration officials are suggesting Iran is once again on the brink of weaponization. The Pentagon's own post-strike assessment at that time concluded that the damage had set Iran's program back only for months, not years. Satellite imagery and independent analysis have shown that there's been limited signs of any reconstitution. The International Atomic Energy Agency remains under the impression that much of Iran's enriched uranium remains entombed at those bomb sites. You can't get hold of it. It is seen to be next to impossible for Iran to re-embark on a quest for the bomb without that activity alerting United States or Israeli intelligence agencies. Former UN Inspector David Albright stated publicly that there is no evidence that Tehran is actively rebuilding a weapons program and that activities appear largely on hold. Trump and his administration officials have also charged that Tehran is developing an intercontinental ballistic missile capability enough to reach the United States' own territory. The Iranian government has said for years it has no intention of producing a nuclear bomb, and international inspectors have said they haven't detected any active plan to do so. At the same time, the United States intelligence previously assessed that if Iran chose to pursue this intercontinental ballistic missile capability, that milestone would not even arrive until the mid-2030s. We're talking about 10 years away here. That does not eliminate the risk, but it does complicate that narrative that Trump and his administration are giving of this imminent continental threat. Now, this comes as many of you may have also seen the news story of the Iranians buying the Chinese supersonic anti-ship missiles. It was an exclusive story broken earlier this week by Reuters. Yet what isn't being highlighted enough is that that deal was agreed over 2 years ago, and the missiles are not even expected to arrive for another 2 to 3 years. Now, such stories are often leaked conveniently to support the case that anyone wants, particularly the government wants, which currently is to create that scare for the American people that American soldiers are under threat, or that the American people are under threat. All these comments are coming as the United States and Iranian officials are in nuclear negotiations, first in Geneva and they're supposed to continue in Vienna. Oman's foreign minister, who's the mediator of the talks, said that both sides made significant progress and they are going to meet again next week to discuss various technical details in Vienna.
Is within our reach.
A peace deal?
Yes, is within our reach if we just allow diplomacy the space it needs to get there.
Trump's own description of the talks is that he's not happy at the way they're going. However, active discussion does not preclude war. You may recall that United States conducted military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities last year in June when talks were actually undergoing, and they're in the midst of those talks when the 12-day Iran-Israel war started.
I'm not happy with the fact that
they're not willing to give us what we have to have.
The Omani foreign minister, in an interview with Face the Nation, explicitly said that Iranians had agreed to having zero stockpile, zero enrichment, and agreed to a full verification by the IAEA inspectors, meaning it would never have enough material to create a nuclear weapon if it reaches a deal with the United States. Now, most nuclear reactors that produce electricity only require uranium that is enriched to between 3 to 5%. Highly enriched uranium is anything above 20%, and weapons-grade uranium needs to be enriched above 90%. Under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, which was signed with the Obama administration, Iran agreed to limit its uranium enrichment as part of that broader deal to prevent it from developing nuclear weapons and to lift United States sanctions on the country. Specifically, at the time, the agreement set a firm cap of 3.67% enrichment of uranium for 15 years. Now, this deal, if it is as stated by the Omani foreign minister, is much more than what the Iranians agreed to under the JCPOA. It has everything that should make Trump happy enough to be able to walk away and say that he got a better deal than Obama did. Yet we know that this is unlikely to happen. This war is happening because of the needs and the requirements of Bibi. Now, the driving force to push the Americans into war is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who faces a re-election this year, and he has a very strong incentive to project resolve.
The carrier itself, the nest, and you've got all these hornets flying around it. And the Hornets, though, are offensive. They have the ability.
From his perspective, striking Iran's nuclear sites, degrading ballistic missile capabilities, and limiting broader missile infrastructure strengthens his standing with Israeli voters. Now, polling has shown that significant public support inside Israel exists for decisive action against Iran, which makes a hardline posture politically advantageous for Bibi. Now, even more importantly, a deeper structural shift is occurring in the United States, which is worrying Israeli policymakers. It lies in the American public opinion. Gallup's 2026 polling shows that for the first time, more Americans say their sympathies in the Middle East lean towards the Palestinians rather than the Israelis. And that shift accelerated during the Gaza war. We're talking about 41% versus 36% for the Israelis. To policymakers in Jerusalem, that polling data does not look like sentiment. It looks like a narrowing strategic window. For decades, United States sympathy leaned overwhelmingly towards Israel. And that political cushion is what gave Israeli leaders the confidence that even during controversial operations, Washington would provide that diplomatic cover, the military aid, and the veto protection at the United Nations in their favor. But the Gallup numbers now show something that is qualitatively different. Sympathy is no longer lopsided. It's actually nearly balanced. And in some measures, it actually tilts towards the Palestinians. And that shift has accelerated during the Gaza war. In strategic terms, this changes the time horizon for this war. There's not much time left as far as the Israelis see it. Because alliances are not going to be only built on treaties or weapon transfers. They're actually built on political sustainability. If public opinion in the United States continues to move, the cost for any American administration to openly align with Israeli escalation starts to rise. And future US administrations may face greater resistance to open-ended military backing. Congress may become much more divided. AIPAC may not have the power it has today. Now, as the White House becomes much more cautious, we're talking about the future in that scenario, the language may shift from being ironclad support to de-escalation. That does not end the alliance, of course, but what it does do is it tightens the margin for maneuvering from Israel's perspective. So, the way the Israelis see it is, Iran's nuclear enrichment that has advanced beyond JCPOA levels missile capabilities that continue to expand and evolve, and regional proxies that still are technically active. If Israeli leadership believes that the military threat is going while American political flexibility is shrinking, then the logic becomes quite uncomfortable for them. And the longer they wait, the harder it becomes to act against Iran without the United States backing. Now, there's also the matter of narrative framing here, and that's very interesting. Gaza has been framed through the humanitarian imagery, right? It's reshaped American sympathy. A confrontation with Iran reframes that whole debate towards now state-level deterrence, nuclear breakout timelines, ballistic missiles reaching Israel, and Israel's existential security. In essence, the focus comes back to Israel. Now, that reframing can temporarily reset the political alignment because the existential security threats mobilize differently from the protracted humanitarian conflict. In other words, widening the conflict can paradoxically narrow the political debate on the issue. Now, add this to the domestic Israeli politics. Leaders facing internal pressure often seek strategic reinforcement. Look at what the unpopular government in Pakistan is doing, first with India and now with Afghanistan. Here, look at Israel's confrontation with Iran. It projects strength, it reinforces deterrence doctrine, and it unifies segments of the electorate that may be divided over Gaza. It turns the question from proportionality in Rafah to survival in the face of Tehran's capabilities. It's the oldest trick in the book. As Samuel Johnson, the British writer, wrote, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. The United States, meanwhile, has expanded its list of demands to Iran from non-weaponization to surrendering highly enriched uranium, banning future enrichment, curtailing ballistic missiles, and ending the regional proxy support. Now, when these demands keep expanding during negotiations, the probability of impasse obviously increases. And in that scenario, what does history teach us? Well, it teaches us that wars are rarely declared in a huge clarity. They emerge when actors believe that the window for operating or operations is closing faster than the diplomacy can actually leave it open for. In 2003, the phrase that was used at the time is that we could not wait for the smoking gun to become a mushroom cloud. It was the preventative logic built on that projected future threat rather than the present, which led to invasion. And that is what makes the current moment so delicate. If policymakers in Washington or Jerusalem believe that Iran's enrichment trajectory, its missile development, and regional entrenchment are steadily narrowing the strategic gap, then delay for them begins to look like a risk. And if at the same time American public opinion is shifting and political flexibility may tighten even more in the future, then the perception of that closing window intensifies. It is not that war becomes inevitable, it's that the calculus shifts from should we act to can we afford not to act now. I'm Najma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. Thank you for joining me today. Have a great day.